You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I'm Michael Halcomb, and this is an episode where we talk about a fallacy of the week. So it's a fallacy of the week episode on the Proof Text podcast here, and I'm excited that you're listening. Last time we talked about 5 prominent logical fallacies, and in today's episode, I want to talk about something that's really, really important. I want to distinguish between a logical fallacy and an appeal. Those are two different things. So we're going to explore, we might even call them logical tricks and persuasive techniques. Right? So there's a difference between a logical fallacy and an appeal to something. Sometimes an appeal can indeed be a logical fallacy, but not always. Sometimes appeals are legitimate. And when we know some of these rules of logic and are able to distinguish between logic and logical fallacies and appeals and logic and appeals, that's important. We're on the right track. So let's get started with this. Logical tricks, logical fallacies. First things first. These are kind of like, right, logical fallacies are kind of like sneaky traps in arguments that can really mess things up. So let me give you just a few examples. Like we've talked about some of these last time. One is the straw man trick or the straw man fallacy. And that's when someone twists what another person says to make it easier to attack, right? And though in fact, a lot of times just create a whole argument that the other person isn't making, knock that new argument they've created down, that they've given the illusion that the other person's making. And when they knock it down, it makes them seem like the wise one, the victor, right? The philosopher. You can imagine someone saying, right, oh, you think all chores are easy? I bet you'd love to clean toilets all day, right? And so we have a kind of logical fallacy there. Just because someone thinks all chores are easy doesn't in fact mean that they'd love to clean toilets all day. That's a completely separate argument, but the person's pinning it on the person who's saying all chores are easy, right? And then they're creating this new argument that, you know, they want that cleaning toilets all day is easy, and then they're knocking that down to make themselves look smarter and the other person look absurd. So this is a very, very common logical fallacy, and you got to watch out for the straw man because it happens all the time. And you'll notice a lot when people blame shift or when the argument seems to go a direction that you know doesn't make any sense. You'll often discern that there's a logical fallacy of straw man happening there. The next one that I want to think about is what's called the ad hom or the ad hominem attack or trick or fallacy. And this is where instead of arguing against the idea that the person's putting forth, someone attacks the person instead. Like you can't trust Bob because he's always late, right? And so you're attacking Bob and saying you can't trust him, right? Rather than dealing with the issue of him always being late. It's silly, right? You'll see a lot of blame shifting here too. So this is another one to watch out for, the ad hom. It means attacking the person, to the man, literally, or to the person in Latin. You're going straight to the person rather than dealing with the argument, circumventing the argument, going straight to them. There's this false dichotomy that I've talked about a lot on the podcast, is where someone presents only 2 options when there are actually more. It's like saying either you're with us or against us, either for us or against us, right? And people sneak these kinds of fallacies into arguments on purpose or sometimes by accident, but either way, they mess up things big time. All right, so let's talk now. So those are logical fallacies, examples of logical fallacies, 3 of the 5 that I shared in the previous episode. Let's talk about how people persuade us, right? How people convince us to believe things. And they do this by using appeals. Okay, this is very important. This isn't necessarily logic. This is an appeal. And these are like special tools. Think of somebody like a speaker. He has a tool case, or she has a tool case. They have special tools to persuade people. And appeals are the main tools for orators, rhetors, speakers, right? We're going to break these down into three types, as this is what the ancient Greeks did, right? First up, we have ethos. Some people will call it ethos. This is the appeal to credibility, right? So when someone's going to appeal to credibility when they do this. This is when someone tries to make themselves sound trustworthy, right? They're going to appeal to that. A doctor said, trust me, I've been doing this for 20 years, right? So that's an appeal to authority, and that's not necessarily wrong. The doctor, he's been doing it 20 years, may well have the credibility there. So that's not necessarily wrong. That's not a fallacy. It can turn into a fallacy, but it's not by default a fallacy. We also have pathos. Some people will say pathos. This is the appeal to emotion, when someone tries to make you feel something so that you'll agree with them. It's like when people tell a sad story to make you want to help, right? Or people use humor to make you laugh and then suck you in. And then the third thing, so we got ethos, pathos, and then the last thing we have logos. And this is the appeal to logic or reason. This is when someone tries to use facts and data, reasons to back up their position. It's like building a strong case with evidence. Now, logical fallacies usually don't have evidence, right? But the appeal to reason, logos, can be based on evidence, so it's not always wrong. But people can use these appeals in positive ways or in negative ways. They can use them to be honest or dishonest. They can use to be the right thing or wrong thing, the honest thing or the tricky thing, right? And that's when you go into that tricky territory, dishonest territory, that's when they're being used for purposes of manipulation, and we need to watch out for that. And so I want to talk about just real briefly then when appeals are okay. And this is, I think, where it gets kind of interesting, because not all the appeals are bad, and not all appeals are tricks or fallacies. They can be, as I said, but they're not by default. And it can be pretty helpful, actually, when somebody's using an appeal the right way. So here's an example. Imagine a politician giving a speech that makes you feel hopeful about the future, and the politician's using emotion to connect with you. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing and a manipulative thing, but it's not necessarily a bad or manipulative thing. Or a teacher, right, explaining something with clear facts, clear evidence, and they're using logic and reason to help you understand. That's a good thing. They're appealing to that, right? But we need to be careful, because appeals can turn into tricks if they're used to trick us or to hide the truth. It's like when someone says, well, this famous person said it, so it must be true. Well, that's not always the case just because they're famous. So speaking truth. And so the next time someone tries to convince you of something, remember to think critically and watch out for these kinds of tricks. And try to discern whether they're falling into a logical fallacy, or whether they're falling into a dishonest or manipulative appeal, or whether it's a legit appeal, right? Whether it's a legit appeal and a legitimate persuasive technique. Because not everything we hear is true, and so it's important to question and think for ourselves. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's it for this episode, friends. I'll stop there and say I hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.